stuff go. So we're recording. Take it
All
away,
right.
Patrick.
How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to the Real FI podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McGrath, with my co-host, James Rippion. How's it going today, James?
Going great, Patrick. I think we're going to have a great episode this week. I say that every week because we've never had a terrible one. So that's we're going to keep the momentum going. So, Patrick, I'm going to flip this one back to you, man, since you've got that pre-existing relationship here. And why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today? Why don't we switch it up?
Yes, of course. So our guest today is a now longtime friend. His name is Kevin Yungman. He is mine and Danielle's real estate attorney, closing guy, title company guy, man with all of the solid advice whenever I need it for all of the crazy types of things that we do when it comes to seller financing and these off-market deals and just how to structure contracts and all of this great stuff that we're going to get into. But his name is Kevin Yungman, currently working with Community Title Network. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, boys. How you guys doing? Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we're doing great.
Of course, of course, of course. I have to say, not only is Kevin a great real estate attorney, he is also an amazing golfer. He gets out there once a year and he knows how to make it shine out there on the golf course. So, man of many talents, man of many
There you go.
talents.
Thank you, Patrick.
Of course, of course. Kevin, why don't you give us a little bit of background? Just tell us, where you've gotten all this experience from, why you got into real estate, and like being a real estate attorney.
Sure, sure. So I'm actually just coming up to 20 years in the industry. My background in undergrad was in economics and government. I liked a lot of the urban planning. Grew up in Howard County, Maryland. For some of you guys out there that may have heard of Jim Rouse before, my dad used to work for the Rouse Company. Jim was a real innovator, helped develop planned communities like Columbia, helped kind of restructure urban centers with places like the Harbor Place in Baltimore and elsewhere. And I always found real estate. I was always more interested in real estate than I was kind of in other investments because it was tangible. I always found that was more tangible for people. It was easier to get people to have a more vested interest in property that they own, that they lived in, that they rented out, that they rehabbed, that they flipped, than just on the stock market. I felt that was kind of more abstract and didn't have the personal touch that real estate does. So for me, I am a people person and I enjoy the real estate transaction side of the world. So that's really what kind of pulled me in this direction.
So what kind of things were you doing with Rouse? Was that when you were starting your legal career? Were you doing a legal capacity thing with him, or was it something else?
So yeah, so I just clerked at the Rouse Company during law school, but I was familiar growing up with the Rouse Company, as they were building mixed use centers and revitalizing downtown urban areas, and I just thought that real estate, not just growth in real estate, but that real estate could constantly reinvent itself. A lot of that's happening in Columbia now. It's kind of deemed broadly as Columbia 2.0, where Columbia, Maryland was considered a very innovative place 50 years ago, just celebrated about 50 years in existence. But of course, like anything else, over time needs to evolve. And now you watch an area evolving, you have the infrastructure here, and you can turn it over into a new generation, into a new century, into new decades. And I find that fascinating, and I like being a part of that, watching it change.
Exactly. And I believe that's kind of the route where Hagerstown, Maryland is headed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think for that next decade, I think we're
Mm-hmm.
going to see a lot of growth in that area, and that's kind of you're pretty well versed in that whole area.
Yep.
So that's
I,
that's extremely interesting.
Well, I think it's pretty well known. You hear about it. I mean, you've heard about it in California a lot. You hear about New York, everywhere. The country as a whole is so far behind in inventory. We really slacked in building for about 15 years since the market crashed 15 years ago. And I think part of that revitalization has got to be taking existing, like you just said, Patrick, places like Hagerstown, some of the kind of older like Rust Belt cities up and down 81 and stuff like that, where we can really just revitalize what's already in existence, create some affordable housing and pick some of those areas up. I think of just what Jim Rouse and others did in downtown Baltimore and stuff like that years and years ago. So
what I think is really interesting is when I look where I'm at down here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, looking at some of the inventory that was built in the 70s and 80s, it's a really different type of home.
Right.
Square footage wise, construction materials wise, layout and size wise. I mean, you're looking at a lot of 3-2 brick ranches down here, maybe like 900 to 1,200 square feet. These days, I don't think you'll find a builder out there that's going to be building something like that really economically. Everything else is going to be vinyl siding and 2 floors, 3-4 bedrooms, 1,500 to 2,500 square feet on average, maybe. So it's definitely been a transition, that I've seen in my short existence in the real estate industry.
Absolutely.
And I think they're repurposing a lot of older neighborhoods and a lot of areas. These places like Kevin's talking about, these corridors, they're trying to figure out the next economic and job growth boom for these areas that aren't port cities, or that have that major metropolitan area, that they have a lot of space. So I think we're seeing a lot of growth in like the flex space area, the warehousing, like you said, not only supply of housing, but supply chain management that we all know became such this huge part during the pandemic.
Right.
And we're trying to move more and more manufacturing, more and more jobs back to the United States. And the places that we have to be able to do that are these kind of offshoot second and third tier kind of markets that have a lot of space for us to build a lot of warehouses, and that has a lot of affordable housing for those entry mid-tier jobs. So that's the development, and that's what they did with a Columbia back in the day, where you kind of started and have seen that growth. So you've been in this real estate business per se for such a long time. With that transition, what made you want to specifically go down for a real estate attorney?
Sure. So I like the collaboration in it. Rather than the adversarial nature, the traditional kind of litigation side of being an attorney. Again, I mean, I grew up kind of with the Rouse Company and stuff, and I saw development in real estate as a win-win. We're talking about right now repurposing or turning over areas. Someone that's raise their family in that 3-2 home like you're talking about, James. They hand it over to someone else, the next generation. The next generation updates that house, uses the infrastructure that's already there, and that transaction right there is such an important piece of commerce. So my background again is in economics, and what a lot of people don't understand or take for granted is that reselling properties adds a ton to the economic engine, not only privately for the parties involved and people like myself and lenders, banks, et cetera, involved in the transaction, but also for your state and local government. Real estate transactions drive a lot of the revenue for state and local government. So it really is, kind of a full circle type situation here, where the more transactions we have in a certain area, the more revenue that generates to the local government, which of course adds to the infrastructure and the roads and the schools. And it's really just a matter of getting that wheel going. And again, using as Patrick's example, like a town like a Hagerstown or something like that. Once you get that wheel in motion, I really think you're just kind of going to see the areas like that really spring ahead. Again, it's got a lot of the things that a developer needs without a ton of costs. Again, once you have the infrastructure there, there's the huge expenses behind development. So again, repurposing, refinishing, doing a lot of stuff that Patrick's been very successful at doing out there. It's a win-win for everyone. The community, again, low, moderate income housing, jobs, it all kind of goes together. And that's what I liked about the real estate side of things. It's really not a I win or you win. And Patrick, you and I have done transactions together, but when we're done a transaction, the seller walks away with money, they're happy. You walk away with a new property that you're rehabbing, you're happy. So everyone wins. That's kind of the nature of the game here.
Yeah, that's such a I think a part of an attorney that you don't really hear a lot. And James and I and a lot of investors talk about building their team. So you have to have a team behind you to be successful in anything. And when you're a real estate investor, one of the main persons that I believe you need to have on your team is a good real estate attorney. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring Kevin on to talk about why having a good real estate attorney a part of your team makes a lot of sense and can benefit both of you guys throughout your investing career. So Kevin, can you break down a couple key factors on real estate, on like why you need a real estate attorney? Like what is a real estate attorney and why are they needed in the transaction?
Sure. Well, you definitely want to get someone local. I mean, real estate, it's very localized law. I practice in the state of Maryland. I do have some colleagues that practice in different areas. But you need someone that's barred in that area. And to get back to what I'm saying before, you want someone that actually has an interest in skin in the game. These areas where I practice are areas that I frequent. It's areas that I've grown up or raised my family. I have a concerted interest in seeing these areas be revitalized. I have there's a benefit to me and everyone around me to those situations. So you want to have someone that really understands the area and actually has a vision along with your client, so it's not really just pushing papers, because sometimes, yes, and Patrick's been great at this over the years, building relationships with the particular county or towns or cities that you're doing business in, because as we all know, when you're asking for infrastructure or changes to zoning, different use requirements, the local community is going to ask you for your vision. And they're going to want to see an attorney along with the investor client that shares in that vision. So again, it's important not just to have a good attorney with you for, yes, the paperwork, the contracts, seller financing, recording mortgages, doing the actual settlement, reviewing the title, all the traditional things that a real estate attorney does. But again, having someone local that's invested in the area where you're really doing your work, I think is critical.
Yeah, I think that's valuable. And I think when you can demonstrate you got somebody on your team that is involved with the community, it goes a long way, especially when you're going to the city councils and trying to get land use restrictions changed, modified, or trying to jam a square peg into a round hole for your vision. It's good to have those people in your corner. Absolutely. Talk to us a little bit about some of the common issues that come up in your line of work that people maybe don't have an appreciation of from the outset when they're getting involved in a real estate transaction that could otherwise just be avoided. with a little bit of knowledge up front.
Sure, sure. So sometimes, well, there are some contractual requirements in every local area. So again, going back to what I said before, I mean, there are some, for instance, disclosure requirements in the state of Maryland, as there are in all the states, different disclosure requirements. There are different disclosure requirements that subsets within certain counties or cities within a state that you have to comply with. So it is important to effectuate the transaction to make sure that a seller, for instance, may not know that they have certain requirements, but an attorney does have to know the local rules and regulations to make sure they can put together a valid contract. So there is some technical knowledge behind that, which is important. I think there's some really good investment opportunities out there. Certainly, technology has helped us all with our ability to be able to do a little bit of research up front. We're starting, not to change the subject matter, but that's how I kind of operate. We're starting to see one thing my firm has did a lot of over the years. In the beginning, unfortunately, but it turned out well, was helping to negotiate short sales. So obviously, when the market crashed, we saw some investment opportunities out there. It was kind of the wild, wild west for a while. We really kind of sharpened our focus, got some experience doing things, have been able to help some investors find some good opportunities out there. Patience is what you need. You can't be afraid to miss. You know, sometimes you're gonna push forward on a deal, you're gonna invest a little bit of time and money on it, and then you're gonna find out it's not right. And that's okay. You know, you got to play the long. I think the biggest thing is playing the long game, uh, staying focused. Too many people, again, just look at HGTV and they think they're going to go buy a little rundown shack and they're going to throw some paint on it and flip it and make a bunch of money, and they really don't understand how this works. And it's really the accumulation of what you're doing, property after property after property after property. So it's really having a plan, a long-term plan in place that's important. And then when you are looking at a specific property, I think it's good to have an attorney talking to that seller, doing a little bit of research, because a lot of times the seller doesn't know, or at least they pretend they don't know what exists. You know, someone that says, this property is free and clear. Well, there may be an old mortgage on that property that they are unaware of. There may be an outstanding judgment out there that they're unaware of. There could be a lien from the county or the city against that property that they're unaware of. And that's where the attorney gets involved to kind of do some digging. So when an investor identifies a particular property and has a good plan, and says, hey, I want to do this, this, and this, someone like Patrick, yes, then I can help Patrick kind of reach out to the seller, do a little research, do a little digging, and kind of work backwards to get where we want to go. But we got to find out, what obstacles we have up front to get there. So, yeah. And of course, you get into estates and stuff like that. People have passed away. There's heirs involved. But a little bit of research and a little bit of digging up front is not that difficult usually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes a long way. I remember one transaction I had for a purchase. The seller, of course, said that they had all the liens paid off, it was free and clear. But when we did our title search, it came back with what appeared to be a balance on an encumbrance on title. But what happened was that the loan had been paid off, but the lender never filed the pay. I forget what it's called exactly. The
release.
Yeah, lien release. And that lender had since gone out of business too. So, it created kind of a little bit of a headache with that regard. But going back to what you were saying before with short sales, like tell us a little bit about short sales. Like, what are short sales? What should people be looking out for with short sales? And how does someone make a good short sale transaction work?
Sure. So a short sale, quite simply, is that, a property owner, someone that's entitled to the property, owes more on the property than what the value is worth. So let's say, again, typically let's go back 20 years. Someone buys a property for $500,000 in 2005. They borrow $500,000. And then, 4 years later, the market crashes and the place is worth $400,000. Well, a short sale is asking the lender, hey, will you take 80 cents on the dollar and forgive the rest of that debt? Release your lien against the property so the buyer can purchase the property. Some people would say, well, why would a lender consider doing that? Well, where the prices were falling, it made sense for the lenders to do that, because if they were going to foreclose on that property, they're going to incur a lot more fees and costs involved. And then they're going to send the property to auction. There's a huge timeline there, depending on what state you're in, where the property can decay further, the lender can lose more money. So what we want to do in a short sale is, if there's a property, if there's an owner that's not paying their mortgage or has several mortgages, can't keep up with the property, we want that owner to come to us, retain us. We will reach out to the bank, the lien holders, list that property on the market, find a buyer to offer, something usually below market value, and then negotiate with that bank to try to get them the best deal, the required deal they want. But if the lender or lenders are holding a non-performing note, most of the time they would rather get a percentage of what they're owed back, as opposed to just, keep holding this non-performing loan. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what a short sale is. Because of the pandemic, there were moratoriums across the country on evictions and foreclosures. A lot of people did what was called a forbearance, which means they didn't pay their mortgage for 6 months, 12 months, up to 2 years. And the lender kind of pushed that amount owed to the back end of the loan. All right. So if I didn't pay $50,000 worth of mortgage over 2 years, that $50,000 is tacked on or added to the balance of my mortgage. A lot of people are unaware of that fact. So even though prices have appreciated in certain areas, people that haven't paid their mortgage for a couple of years, they're still generally going to be upside down, because that debt that is accumulated, along with penalties and interest and attorney's fees, is going to be greater than whatever appreciated value they've earned. So there's some people that, they're facing foreclosure right now. And a short sale is, generally speaking, better for those people. We talk to those people. It's kind of individual circumstance. That's on the seller side of things. On the buyer side of things, the nice thing about investors, short sale is very difficult for someone to time their settlement and move. Short sales are not for every buyer out there, because traditionally, I go look for a house, I go under contract, and I settle in 30 or 45 days. Okay, that's kind of the timeline. My lease is over here or whatever, set the movers up and whatever. A short sale, really, if you're trying to time it up, is not going to work well for you. And that creates too much anxiety. Short sale is someone that wants to take a flyer on a property, submit an offer for below market, see how the bank reacts, and it may work, it may not work, but that person is patient, and they're willing to let it go if it doesn't work. But if they're patient, they're willing to hang in there through months of negotiation, they can sometimes get a really good deal on a property through a short sale.
Talk to us a little bit about the market right now. Like, what are you seeing in the market? Is there an uptick of short sales and foreclosures going on? Are things just flat right now? What are you seeing out there?
There's a slight uptick in foreclosures and short sales, but keep in mind that for 2 years there were really none. Again, because of the moratoriums out there. So it's kind of like the dam is breaking a little bit. I'm not seeing prices falling. Again, we still have a supply and demand issue. We still have an inventory issue. Inventory seems to be growing a little bit. The short sales and the foreclosures are really going to be more of a subset out there of, again, people that stopped paying their mortgage, typically as a result of COVID. The other thing I'm seeing on short sales is that people, some small business owners, some business owners out there, they use their house as collateral for what's called an IDOT, an indemnity deed of trust. So they may have taken out a business line. So, maybe their traditional mortgage on their property, their purchase money mortgage, maybe they're not upside down on that. But if they collateralize their personal property for like a business loan or something like that, and the business failed, well, now they're upside down because they have this additional lien, this IDOT indemnity deed of trust against the property. So we're starting to see more of that. Some of the businesses that may have failed or gone under during COVID.
So we're projecting basically to start seeing more and more of that type of stuff come on the market over the next 12, 24 months.
I would think so. Yes. I mean, again, I'm not, don't want to hit the panic button because I don't think we're going to see what we saw 15 years ago. None of the economists out there are really predicting that, because I don't think you're going to see a major crash in prices. Again, supply and demand, the lack of supply is holding prices up, even though interest rates have gone up and you would expect a dip in prices because of that. The lack of inventory has really kind of held the line. Again, you've seen little dips here and there, but nothing like we saw 15 years ago. Again, so the short sales are really going to be, for the most part, limited to people that, again, took out these business lines, used their property for collateral, and or stopped paying their mortgage during the pandemic. But I would tell people to keep their eyes open for them, and to not, turn a blind eye to them, because there can be some nice opportunities out there for investors.
I really like that. And, some of these things are just for people to follow their certain niche. Short sales could be your niche out there. Finding these types of liens against people's properties could be your niche out there. And someone like yourself can help with those transactions to see them through. And with that, I'd also like to get into a couple other of these kind of niche type of investment strategies or ways to make deals happen that require someone like yourself to be able to put them through. I think the first one I'd like to get into, that I know myself and you have done quite a few times, would be that lovely seller financing or owner financing deal. There's people seem to think that that's like an elusive way to make a deal happen. But we're doing those transactions, and people are doing those transactions all the time. Could you kind of, unbreak the fold here and tell us, how they happen, why they happen, and why you need an attorney like yourself to put those together?
No, absolutely, Patrick. And you've done a wonderful job of that. And it's a very smart way to go. And back to what I said earlier about real estate, really can be a win-win situation. And that's the other thing we do. We don't go to sellers, like a bull in a china closet, like my mom used to say. Again, like we want this to be a good experience for all involved. We want it to be a fair experience. We want the people to leave happy. So a seller financing. So what this is, just to introduce it to the people out there that don't understand, let's say I own a property and I don't have a mortgage on it. It's free and clear, okay? Someone like Patrick comes along, wants to buy it, but it's going to be very difficult for an investor out there to get a loan, a mortgage against this property that they want to rehab, or maybe it's a commercial property. It's not maybe a traditional sale. Well, or they want to hold their cash so they can, renovate the property. Well, what can happen is if Kevin's the seller of the property, someone can give me 10 or 20%, all right? And then I hold a mortgage of 80 or 90%, just like a bank would, but I hold it privately. We record an actual mortgage, a deed of trust, depending on your state, it's called a mortgage or a deed of trust. And I'm going to get paid just like a bank. And if the buyer doesn't pay me, I have the right to foreclose on that, just like a bank would. But, the buyer doesn't have to go through all the jumps and steps and provide this and that and this and that to qualify. They're just qualifying with me as a private seller. Now, the benefit to me is I may not want a big lump sum of cash right now. Okay. I may have a bunch of gains there that I'm going to have to pay. So if someone's going to give me 10 or 20% up front, okay, I get a little lump sum of cash, which is nice. But then I'm going to have an annuity, really a monthly, but an annuity over the next couple of years. And what we usually do in those deals is we'll usually balloon those deals to, again, we'll work with the seller to see what their plans are, what they want to do. Maybe someone is, aiming to buy a retirement, a place to retire in 2 or 3 years. So what we'll do is we'll set up like a balloon note in 2 or 3 years. And during that time, the buyer, the investor will pay that monthly mortgage to the seller. And after 2 or 3 years, now the property's worth more. The property's been rehabbed. The investor buyer now has a couple years of rental income to show to a bank. So now it's going to be much easier to refinance and get a loan, a traditional bank loan. And now we can pay the rest of the seller his or her money. So there's all kinds of ways to do that, but seller financing is a tremendous way to go, and really a win-win for both parties. Again, the seller is protected. They, like I said, we record a lien just like you would to any other bank. So if the buyer defaults, seller forecloses and takes that property back, but it avoids them getting that big lump sum up front. And you can do the transaction quick. We don't have to go through all the bank underwriting, the traditional bank underwriting.
So Kevin, let me
Yeah,
ask you this. You've been in it for 20 years now. Have
Uh-huh.
you have you seen a seller finance deal go south after the fact where they've had to foreclose on the property? Like, have you seen examples of that? Because I would imagine that it's not nearly as frequent as a retail purchase for, your typical home buyer who might be upside down. But have you seen examples of that?
Not in a few years. I had one instance, but that was it was a really unique oddball situation. The buyers, but you know what? This is where I say we want everyone on the same page. Like, I had one transaction a few years ago. I was kind of tangential. I was just on the title side of things. I wasn't dealing with the financing. But the valuation and what the buyer was trying to do and what the seller was willing to do, quite frankly, didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I saw the possibility of something going south on it, and it did go south. And seller ended up suing the buyer later. But for the most part, if I'm representing the seller, okay, I am going to protect my client, and we are going to want the buyer to have some kind of history. We're going to need some kind of buyer assurances based on what they've done before, some kind of track record from our buyer before we just do seller held financing. If I don't know much about the buyer, I'm certainly, as a seller, going to require at least 20% down. I'm not going to lend them more than 80, because that margin right there, now I have the margin to foreclose on them if I got to pay an attorney 5% of the value and go through all the legal expenses to, foreclose on you. But again, someone like Patrick, who's done this and has a really good track record, he's improving the value of the properties. His properties are appreciating. So, I mean, there's risk in everything. I didn't have enough experience, probably thankfully, before the crash 15 years ago. But yeah, certainly, if like any bank, or if you did seller financing in 2007 or 8 and you lent 90% and then the values went down 30 or 40%, then yeah, that was kind of a catastrophic thing. But hopefully that's a once in a lifetime situation that I don't see happening again.
So what I've found as a negotiating strategy is, sometimes when you find a property that you want to get, and you might have that in for seller financing, sometimes you can be incentivized to offer more than maybe what the property might be worth to get that seller convinced to do seller finance terms. Because as an investor, there might be more value to that seller financing structure than necessarily what's being paid. But it sounds like that one example you were giving, maybe they just frankly overpaid and like the numbers didn't make sense. So When it got down to it, maybe when that balloon was occurring, like the refinance was probably impossible. So just,
Yeah.
you got to be careful, I think, of, making sure that the terms make sense. Any price might make sense for the right terms, but you just got to be reasonable.
Right. I mean, it's still, we're still human. We still have to use logic. And I think in this case that I was talking about, I think the buyer was desperate and the seller was taking advantage of the buyer's desperation and was quite frankly being greedy and had unreasonable expectations. And I think that's kind of what happened on that. And I actually did advise the seller. I said, I don't know about this one. So yeah, sometimes, I mean, you're still going to go with your gut on certain things and just say, these pieces aren't really lining up for me. I don't really see how this is. I'm looking at the property. I'm looking at the work that's necessary in the property. I'm looking at the buyer's track record, and didn't make a lot of sense to me. But common sense should always prevail. And again, it's got to be the right situation for sure.
Exactly. And I think one of the key things is that out there is, none of these numbers that we're talking about are set in stone when it comes to real estate and a negotiation. Like seller financing, owner financing doesn't have to be where you give the seller 10 or 20% and they finance 80%.
Right.
It doesn't have to be 20 to 30-year amortization with a certain interest rate. Like people talk all the time about how seller financing, you would think that you have to be paying more than what the market rate for interest is. But that's not the case. Like Kevin and I just did one where, the seller financed the down payment and we went conventional for the financing and we did a balloon, 3-year balloon at 5% interest for 3 years. So they seller financed the down payment for us to be able to buy the property, and they put a lien on that property. But you could also put a lien on one of your other properties. If the seller's not feeling comfortable with the deal, you could say, hey, for the time being, let's put half the lien on this property that you have and half the lien on this other property that I have that has equity into it, right, to make it work. Yep. Or we can extend the amortization on some of these. You could do 30, 40, 50-year amortization on some of this stuff. We literally just closed one last month where we got a 4% interest rate for 5 years with 2 extensions. So I think one of the key things is that as long as both parties agree and the lawyers agree and it seems fair, it doesn't really matter what the numbers really are. Is that kind of the case, Kevin?
No, I agree. And I think that's good, Patrick. And I think something that you do really well too is, and I was talking about before, I was using an example of, maybe someone that wants to, buy a house in 2 or 3 years or something like that. So I think the best thing to do is to go to a prospective seller and say, what are your goals? What are your financial goals, your timelines? What do you require? What are your goals? And then work backwards from there. I think that's something that Patrick and I together are really good at teaming up on. And James, you were saying something about, maybe you offer more money or something like this. Well, we had a certain person in one of our transactions, they wanted to net X dollars. Okay. Well, we were actually able to show them, and Patrick did a great job of it, of reducing the purchase price from what they were asking for, and then showing the interest that they were going to earn on the seller held financing over a several year period to get them to that number. So they were happy because they were going to achieve their number. They weren't going to get it in a lump sum, so they weren't going to get crazy taxed on it in a lump sum. Patrick ended up with a really good deal, and so did the seller. So we got the seller what they wanted, but we built it differently. So, both parties got to their end goal. And I think the sellers really appreciate that, is as opposed to coming in and being like, oh, hey, seller, let me tell you how brilliant I am and show you this and this and this. No, ask the seller, what do you want? and let me see how we can figure out how to get there, get you a model to get there. And right then and there, you start off with a much more positive relationship and negotiation, and someone that wants to work with you. Again, I used bull in a china closet before. If you just go in bull in a china closet, you're going to turn a lot of people off. It's just not how you should approach things, I don't think. So
I agree with that
Exactly.
100%. I think, that's how you find a win-win situation. And real
right,
estate is a relationship-based industry,
100%.
first and foremost.
Yep.
So, I've had a lot of conversations with investor buyer clients and sellers about seller financing. And a lot of times they just want to throw it out there right away. Like, oh, are you going to accept seller financing? But that's
Right.
the wrong way to go about it. And just like you're saying, you got to identify what the goals are, and fit your narrative into those goals so you can, sell it more or less, and
Right.
actually, make sure that the seller is going to be amenable to it.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, and make, empower the sellers too. We're not trying to come in there and bulldoze someone, because you will have people that will agree to something in the beginning, but of course then they have seller's remorse because they didn't understand or something like that. And people ask me as an attorney, well, who can get out of this contract or that contract? And I always tell people, I said, an agreement's only worth what someone's willing to pay to enforce it. So, once the bad blood starts, everyone's going to lose at the end of the day, whether it's with attorney's fees or heartache or whatever it is, damage in the community or something like that. It's just not the way to go.
I agree with that 100%. I feel like every deal I approach, if I don't feel like I could do it with a handshake, I just don't feel good about it. Of course, you're going to have it papered, you're going to have the
Of
contract,
course.
but I, having been in a little bit of litigation myself, it's never worth it. Litigation is the epitome of a lose-lose. The only people who's happy is the attorney collecting the
Right.
settlement check, or the
Right.
or the billable hour,
Right.
for sure. So, getting on the same page 1000% needs to be both buyer and seller's priority.
Yep.
And let's
Definitely.
not forget having the attorneys feel like they can work with each other, because that
Mhm.
part of this last deal that Kevin was just talking about, we actually agreed to scale back some of the pressure on some of the terms that the other attorney wanted in these contracts, because this particular attorney did all of the real estate transactions in this particular area. Like, this guy's been practicing for like 50 years, and every piece of real estate that I want to buy in the next decade, this guy basically is the lawyer and the attorney for all of these guys. So it's like, hey, this is going to be the first transaction that we're doing with him. Let's show him that we're easy to work with. We're not pushing back too much. And that was something that Kevin and I had to discuss and talk about and agree to going in. And I'm just like, hey, are we, do you agree that we're covered on everything? Do we really need to fight for this? No. All right, cool. Let's just move on. So having those conversations, that's part of your team, and that helps the transactions move along as well. So, and speaking of moving along, I'd like to move into something that's really, really popular right now that I hope you could shed some light on, and it's doing a subject to transaction. This is something that is really popular right now, and I think is going to continue to be more popular with all
Yes.
of these people that have these, low interest 30-year mortgages. So can you give us a little idea on what that is and kind of how it works a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Patrick. So let's just take for example right now, let's say I have a 3% interest rate on my property, and I want to sell it to Patrick, and the market rates right now are 6 or 6.5% or something. So of course Patrick wants my 3% interest rate. Okay, well, he's not going to be able to obtain that interest rate unless my mortgage is assignable. Well, very few mortgages out there are assignable. FHA and VA if you qualify. Some of the ARMs out there are as well, but no one was. Most of your conventional financing vehicles are not assumable. Okay, I said assignable, assumable. So what Patrick's going to do is he wants to buy my house. He wants to take title to my house. I want to sell him my house, but he really just wants to take over my mortgage payment because I got 3% interest rate. So what's going to happen is, and this is another area where title insurance is important, and you got to make sure, you know, you do it correctly, because what's going to happen is Kevin's going to deed his house over to Patrick, all right, and Patrick's taking it subject to Kevin's existing mortgage. Now there's some, you got to be careful with this stuff, because I got to, as a seller, trust this buyer, okay, and I got to make sure I am still in touch with my bank to make sure that the buyer is paying the mortgage, because it's still going to be my name on that mortgage. All right. They're not going to let me, you know, Patrick assuming, like I said, assign it over to Patrick. So my name's still going to be on it. So if someone's going to do that, okay, I understand why, but I would put a cap on it. So if I were advising Kevin in that situation, I'd say, okay, Patrick, I get it. You don't want a 6% mortgage right now. You want my 3% rate, but I got to be able to pay that off, clear that off of my credit eventually, man. So you got 2 years, you know. That's where what we do is we put an agreement together and say Patrick's going to pay Kevin's mortgage for 2 years. And then you could put some incentives in there too, and say, okay, well, Patrick's going to pay Kevin, you know, X dollars a month or something like that. But at the end of 2 years, Patrick's going to have to refinance that. And I don't care what the rates are. It's too bad. You know, that's going to balloon at 2 years. You got to pay that off, or, you know, I'm taking my property back. There's definitely some dangers in that, but there's dangers in, you know, seller financing and anything. Look, there's life is not risk free. I mean, that's just how it goes. You know, as an attorney, I try to help people minimize the risk as much as possible, but nothing's without risk. But yes, I think it's a very good vehicle. If I was trying to sell my house right now with a crappy inventory out there and stuff, if I wanted to get top dollar for my house, James, you were saying before in seller financing, you know, and maybe the buyer offers more money to the seller. Okay, so maybe that's my carrot, you know. Well, in this case, same thing. If I'm going to sell, you know, Patrick my house for $300,000, and he would otherwise have a 6% interest rate, but he can get my 3% interest rate. Well, now all of a sudden, my house is worth $325,000 to him, you know? So, yeah, maybe that's my margin right there. That's the carrot to me. That's the reward for the risk I'm willing to take, is he's going to give me an extra $25,000 for the property because he's going to have a much lower monthly payment, you know? So exactly, just always go back to what we said before. If you create a win-win situation for the parties, then everyone can accept the risk, you know? So that would be my reward, my benefit for leaving my name on the mortgage, okay, and on my credit report, essentially, is that, well, I'm going to make the buyer give me an extra 5 or 10% in price, because they're going to still save money, you know, in their monthly payments. So over 2 years, they're going to save $40,000 in payments, or 3 years or something like that. So to give me an extra 20 or 25 is a win-win for both parties. So yeah,
And it
no, I
doesn't
think it's a
have to
great
be.
idea.
1 second, James. It doesn't have to be like the 2 years though. You can,
Right.
you can, like, if you were representing me and I said, hey, I want it to be the rest of the life of the mortgage, you know what I
Right.
mean? It
Mhm.
can be that too.
Absolutely.
James,
Yeah,
take it
and
away,
I
baby.
think this is all going to be presenting a massive opportunity for buyers and investors in the future. Specific to my market, we live right outside of Fort Bragg, military base, so there's a lot of VA purchasers. And
Okay.
what's really cool with the VA loan is, as you mentioned, it's assumable, but there's also some perks to that. Well, first of all, you have to be able to qualify for the loan per VA lending standards. But a good benefit is that you don't have to have the home reappraised. Like the property is already appraised, and you're going to take over the mortgage for the seller, the VA former owner, and you don't have to be a veteran to do it. You can assume it as a civilian. You don't have to have your entitlements through the VA. But the catch being, the seller is going to lose their entitlement or a portion of it for future transactions that they're trying to buy. But going back to the subject to transaction, how is the lender looking at this transaction? So are they totally on board with the subject to structure, or is there something that maybe a buyer should be maybe aware of vis-a-vis the lender?
So yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so that's really kind of where the seller is taking the risk right there. So again, go back to my example of Patrick buying a property from me. You know, if that loan is not assumable, okay, now in certain situations, especially on the commercial side of things, which are a little different, um, in a perfect world, like you're talking about on the VA loan, we would go to Bank X, who has my mortgage, and we would say, hey, you know, Patrick wants to assume my loan at 3%. If they say yes, then that's great. That's a perfect scenario. The subject to comes into the fact that, like, well, banks aren't going to do that because they want the market rate today. Again, unless it's a VA. So what's happening is Patrick's going to start. He's going to take title to my property. Okay. The bank can call that loan, by the way, because if I transfer my interest in the property to someone else other than myself, while I still have an existing mortgage, the bank can call that loan. Now, typically they're not going to, because as long as Patrick or the buyer is making the mortgage payments, you know, that loan is still performing. All right. The danger is really on the seller side of things to make sure that Patrick is still performing and he doesn't default on that loan. But again, it's just going to take a little due diligence on the seller side. You know, again, to make sure the mortgage payment's getting paid. That's
So
all.
would you recommend, is there like a an escrow service or a mortgage payment type of thing that you kind of work out in this transaction, so it's not going from Kevin Youngman's checking account making the payments to Patrick McGrath's checking account making the payments, or how, is something along those lines included in the services of the transaction?
So yes, if I were the seller in that transaction, I would make Patrick pay Kevin X dollars and then Kevin make the mortgage payment, only because that way I can track that Patrick's making, you know what I mean? I'm still in charge of it right there. I still have control over it. So if the buyer doesn't pay me, I know the mortgage is not getting paid. I'm still paying the mortgage. So that's how I would do it if I were the seller side and I wanted to protect myself.
Well, that's a good
Makes
point, because you know you don't want to. I can just imagine a situation where the sellers, you know, just letting the buyer take care of everything, and then wham bam, the property's foreclosed on, and you know now you've got a
Right.
deficiency judgment against you for, you know, the difference and
Right.
stuff like that.
Well, and then I got to try to get title back from Patrick. So again, I mean, there's risks involved to the seller on this one. Sorry, Patrick, I keep talking to your name like you're going to default on the mortgage you take from me. You would never
It's
do
all
such
good.
a thing, my man. So, but again, everything's a cost benefit analysis. So go back to what I said before. What's the reward here? What's the carrot? And if the carrot is, yeah, okay, buyer, you're going to give me an extra 5 or 10% in purchase price. Well, now it's worth the risk to me because I just pocketed that money. So let's say that money is a year's worth of payments. Well, if I got to start making payments and I have to foreclose or evict, well, I have the margin there. I got the money there to do it. I hope I don't have to. And if I don't have to, then I win. But even if I have to, I'm not going to lose anything because I've already built in that, you know, kind of percentage right there in case there's a default.
Exactly. And I think there is third party services
Mm-hmm.
for this as well, because
Sure,
you
right.
could be saying it from the other side and going, well,
You don't trust
as a
me,
buyer, I have all the risk because I'm giving you
right?
the money,
Mm-hmm.
you're not making the payments, and then you can take
Right,
everything back, because it's the other way around. If I try to foreclose on you and the
right.
mortgage, they could do the due on sale clause. So this is an extremely complex
Mm-hmm.
transaction, but the key thing I want to put out there is that it can happen. Like these
Absolutely.
types of transactions that we're talking about, they are legal, they can be done correctly, but you have to make sure that you have a professional, knowledgeable attorney, real estate attorney, to navigate these waters to make sure you're doing them correctly and covering your ass during these types of things, because you hear it all the time. Oh, you can't do subject to, you can't do, this type of loan or this type of transaction. You can't do seller financing or seller carryback with only a small portion. The property has to be paid off free and clear for you to make these things happen. That's not the case. You can do these transactions. You can benefit from these things, and both parties can both benefit, but you have to make sure you have a professional walking you through these types of transactions. So before we go, I got one more that I want to ask about, and it's called the wrap mortgage. It's another term that gets thrown around all the time, and everybody's like, I don't know what it means, but I hear people do it. Like, explain this to us. What the hell is that?
Okay, so yeah, wrap mortgage, and right now it's hard to find. Excuse me, guys. I don't know. I have reached out to some banks out there to see who's doing this. I think a lot of banks have been left a little flat-footed because a wrap mortgage has not been used, quite frankly, in about 40 years. So what a wrap mortgage is again, just going to use kind of random numbers here, but let's say I owe $200,000 on my property and it's worth $300,000. So buyer comes along, wants to pay me $300,000, but again, wants to assume my mortgage at 3%. Okay, so what you end up with is a new lender gives you a loan for, like, think of a donut. So the whole of the donut right there is that $200,000 existing mortgage at 3%. Well, I now need a second mortgage, okay, of $100,000 to fill that gap. That $100,000 mortgage is going to be at whatever, 6%, okay? But they're going to blend those together into what's called a blended rate, all right? So I'm going to wrap around the existing mortgage with that $100,000 delta, okay? Now we're going to end up with a blended rate. Well, yeah, you're not going to get a $300,000 mortgage at 3%, but since 2/3 of that mortgage was at 3 and 1/3 at 6, you're going to end up with a blended rate at maybe 4, 4.25. So you're still going to benefit way more than you would have taken out $300,000 on the open market. So that's what the wraparound is. Again, think of it like a donut wrapping around what's existing already, kind of fill in that delta.
So I feel like that's something we're definitely going to see as rates, stay and remain elevated, possibly go higher from here. And it,
Right.
like we've been harping on this whole episode, it's going to open up opportunities for people to do creative financing options that just aren't customary for the times at the
Right.
moment. So just keeping your eyes open. I know my mom used to work in the mortgage underwriting business, and she like the wraparound mortgage used to be like a hot thing to do. And I think that was pre-2008 that it was like really hot. I'm surprised to hear that it was even popular 4 years ago. But I'm very curious to see where the market goes and what kind of lending options become available to us.
Right. And especially in an area like you were saying, James, where you have a lot of VA mortgages around there. Same with our area, Patrick, because, we have a lot of kind of military and a lot of VA loans around here. Absolutely. I mean, if you can if you can assume an existing mortgage at 3% or less, of course you're going to do that. And it's a huge benefit to a seller. I mean, if I'm competing against my neighbor to sell the same property, and someone can qualify to assume my existing mortgage at that low rate, again, go back to what we were saying before, pencil to paper, as my dad, the accountant, would say. Like I have a huge benefit in marketing and selling my property versus my neighbor when I have that benefit to give someone. So yeah, no, I think you're going to see a lot of it. It's just a matter of, some of the banks out there, I'm sure they're working on it right now, but they got to figure out kind of logistically, and, maybe your mom knows, because she used to do those, like you said, figure out kind of logistically how to do those.
Exactly. Well, we're gonna get into our last segment of the show, but guys, we are dropping so much crazy knowledge on you guys. So I hope everyone that's been listening and still listening out there really has an appreciation for the experience and knowledge that you have just enlightened us all with. But that gives us to a perfect segue of the last segment of the show that we like to call the Big Four. So, James, take it away.
Kevin, this show, it's typically all about financial independence, helping people use some strategies to just achieve their financial goals. I want you to kind of look inside of what you do financially and give us something that you do on a typical day or just have done in the past that feels like a cheat code, something like a hack to really help your financial position improve. So what's something that you do to help your financial situation?
So something I do to help my financial situation. Ignore my kids. That's that's the best thing to do. One of the things that I've done to help my financial situation is I take the first deal I do every month, and I take all that money and I put it away. So I know it's I don't know if anyone's ever done that before, but I constantly I I intentionally keep myself on edge and anxious for the next deal because I will take a bunch of money from my first deal of the month and like I said and pretend I don't have it. I scoot that out into a different account, into like a savings account and pretend it's not there. So I think a lot of people will say, "Oh, well after my first 5 deals this month, I got enough money to pay my bills, so everything else is icing." I actually turn it around and I push money aside at the beginning in the first couple deals. And then I'm like, oh man, I got to get those next 5 deals to pay my bills. Okay. So it keeps I don't know, keeps the drive, keeps the anxiety, if you will, not too much anxiety, but it keeps the edge going when I push that aside. And I know it's there, but psychologically, I pretend it's not there. So
The hunger.
that's what I do.
I love it.
The
Yeah, I
hunger,
think
man,
there's a
the
lot to be
hunger.
said for creating that situation where you got to work harder,
Yeah.
in making sure that you have the deals coming in. I know I've done similar things with, anytime I've had paychecks coming in, automatically having them dispersed to other accounts that I just don't see on a regular basis because out of sight, out of mind, you're not tempted to spend it. And then it's going to more productive use being invested elsewhere and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yep. I mean,
I like
that's
that.
my best advice to people. I mean, whether you're investing in real estate or in your 401k or whatever, I mean, you got to make sure at a young age. And look, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, man. I got hit hard 15 years ago. A lot of us did. I was in my early 30s, and if I hadn't worked hard and kept at it, I probably would have gone under completely, like a lot of people did. But keeping that hunger and that drive every day, you got to keep at it, man. Again, it's the long game. There are ups and downs. I mean, Patrick has done well in some deals and not as well in other deals. I mean, that's just how the cookie crumbles, right, Patrick?
100%, 100%. And you always got to pay yourself first. That's what this is all about. Like you said, paying yourself first. Such great advice. So we call this next one resources. So it doesn't have to be real estate related, doesn't have to be finance related, but are there any books, podcast, or people that you feel has made a positive impact on your thought process, the way that you view the world that you think our listeners could benefit from?
Well, like I said, I mean, I go back to the days of so I'm going to age myself here. I go back to the days of Jim Rouse, and there was a really cool politician who ran for president named Jack Kemp back in the 80s and 90s, who again they believed in capitalist principles to benefit society. Like I said, go back to the whole core win-win situation. The people that I like to listen to believe in what I call positive sum game theory. Okay. Zero sum game theory is I win the game or you win the game. Okay. There's a winner and a loser. If you look at the world and you look at transactions as a win-win situation where I can make money, you can make money, we can provide better housing, we can uplift a community. Putting all those people together, those are the kind of people that I listen to. And I mean, I scatter across the board listening to different people here and there, and read different people here and there. But mainly it's the optimistic outlook of creating that positive sum game theory. That's what I like to listen to and read.
No specifics. I'm going to ask which. Yeah, you got any specifics? Any specific website, book, that anyone can go Google and find out some more information about?
Well,
about what you're talking.
the funny thing is, it took me, I don't know why it took me so long to read it, but I just finished reading Green Lights from Matthew McConaughey, man, and absolutely, dude, and but again, it's just go, life's an adventure, man. So every time you see something, like, go be inquisitive. I mean, this whole podcast is about, you see a situation, you don't look at it as, oh, that's not going to work. I heard this is not going to work. Every situation is workable. Every relationship out there is workable if you figure out what the parties want. So yeah, man. I mean, I guess
That's a
I
great
wish
book.
I had something more intellectual for you, but man, Green Lights, yeah, of course.
No, that's extremely intellectual. I love the win-win situation, theory and all of that. I think you hit it out the park. And I actually have Green Lights sitting right there behind me. So
That's awesome. That's
yeah,
Is that the name of the book? Green Lights.
it is. I'm gonna grab it real quick, actually.
Cool.
Yep.
I'm gonna have to check that out. I didn't know Matthew McConaughey had written a book. So
Just so we're clear, I do have the book sitting right here.
there you go. Yeah, he's
It's on
holding
my
it.
nightstand, Patrick.
That's
Very
right.
nice.
That's right. All
All
right.
right,
Let's
all
get
right,
into
Kevin. So for this one, give us a little picture of what your life is going to be like, either business wise or personally, 5 years from now. Where's Kevin at 5 years from now?
So where's Kevin at 5 years from now? So Kevin, on a personal level, will probably be living down by the water, but I do want to stay in the great state of Maryland. I think I like the Bay. I'm a boater, so I like that. I see some small towns on the western shore of the Bay that I see growing. Again, we talk about redeveloping areas. I see influx of people going down there. Patrick knows what I'm talking about. Is familiar with what I'm talking about.
Easton.
I think from a societal standpoint, again, people are becoming more and more active. So I think from a development standpoint, again, revitalizing existing areas. Look, and people are consciously aware of environmental issues. So again, I think the way to sell development, the way I want to continue to sell what I do and do development with people, is yes, to revitalize areas. I mean, that is always going to be politically, culturally, societally where everyone's going to win, where everyone's going to agree. I'm going to take the existing infrastructure, make it more valuable, so make the tax base greater, provide housing for people, update the area, and I'm going to do all that, bring in revenue to the local and county, state governments without really, having to upset much of the environment that's right there. So that to me is the wave of the future, kind of sustainable communities. That's the kind of stuff that I want to be a part of. And yeah, that's what I hope to be doing the next few years.
Perfect. Love it.
Love it. Love it. All right. Last question.
You got it.
For those that are listening to the podcast, that have been listening to the podcast, that said, man, Kevin really educated me. He motivated me. He inspired me. I need to reach out. I need to get in touch with them. I need to do business with them because I'm in Maryland. What's the best way for those people to get in touch with you?
Hey, man, my cell phone number is always the best way to reach me. 443-722-7347. You can text me or dial me up. I'll take your calls anytime, man. And just like with you guys, yeah, it's about making a living, but I love bouncing ideas off of people. So even if you're not a Maryland resident, if you're investing elsewhere, even if I can't practice, I am still happy to talk to you and try to share my ideas with you. That's, again, this is all the long game. It's good karma. We like sharing ideas. I like meeting and talking to different people with different ideas. So it doesn't even have to be in Maryland. I'm happy to share my thoughts with you and listen to your thoughts as well.
Absolutely love it. All right, I'm going to do this again, and this time I mean it. If you guys liked this episode, leave us a review. Man, we are out here trying to give you amazing guests week after week after week, dropping awesome knowledge. And all we're doing is over here begging for a little review. So go ahead and leave us one, whether you liked it. Even if you hated this episode, go ahead and leave us a review too. We don't really care. And we'll talk to you next time. See you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.